thalassophobia, the persistent and intense fear of deep bodies of water, such as oceans, seas, and lakes. A common and fairly reasonable fear, considering just how unexplored the ocean depths have stayed. A fear that I don't really have, which is why Subnautica has always been one of my favorite games. I remember getting it back in middle school and playing it non-stop for weeks, exploring every inch of this game's massive map, and falling in love with the world. That being said, I was looking back through my Steam page recently, and I saw Subnautica and Below Zero sitting right next to each other. Now, I played Below Zero, but never really finished it. And judging by its Steam page, which boasts only a third the reviews of its predecessor, and a meager, very positive review compared to Subnautica's overwhelmingly positive, I couldn't help but feel like I wasn't the only one it didn't really resonate with. That got me thinking, was Below Zero really the letdown I remember it being? Or was my view of it tainted by those rose-tinted memories of a game that at the point that this came out, I hadn't played in over 5 years? To test this question, I'm gonna pit the games against each other as I play back through each of them, judging them on 5 categories. How effective their opening is, how well they build their atmosphere, the actual story of the games, how fun their gameplay loop is, and finally, how stable the game is. You'll see why this matters as a category later. At the end of each category, I'll give it a score out of 10. And in the end, we'll total them all up and see if Below Zero really was a lackluster follow-up to the gaming giant that was Subnautica, or if it was unfairly shadowed by what came before. If someone asked me what I thought was the most memorable opening to a game I'd ever played, I'd probably say Elder Scrolls V. I mean, it opens with one of the most iconic lines in all of gaming history.
Hey, you're finally awake.
Who wouldn't think of that? Oh, but Subnautica's is pretty good too, I guess. Jokes aside though, I really do like the opening to Subnautica. Sure, you'll probably remember about as much about the actual escape from the Aurora as your character post-head trauma, but it really is hard to match that first moment when you step out of the life pod and see the vast expanse of ocean with your ship burning on the horizon. It really sets in that sense of isolation that the game builds itself around. There's no land in sight. No other life pods floating on the surface. It's just you, alone, with no way home. I could genuinely make an entire video about how perfect this little 5-second moment is in this game. But I'd probably lose you about a minute in, so I'll just leave it at this. You may think this is an over-exaggeration, but I really do think that this little moment played a massive part in this game's success. I remember playing this for the first time back in middle school, and to this day, when I think about Subnautica as a franchise, it's this opening moment that I think of. Following this though, the first bit of the game is fairly slow, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I think the slow opening actually works to the game's advantage. You're free to explore and test out small bits of the gameplay loop, from abducting the local wildlife, to hand mining ores, to finding old schematics and the discarded chunks of your demolished ship. And all of this is done in the relative safety of, well, the safe shallows. The most important part of that statement, by the way, was that you are free to explore. Allow me to take a moment to rant and say, nothing annoys me more than when developers feel like they need to hold your hand through the game with game journalist proof levels of babying and tutorials. Keeping that in mind, let's look at how Subnautica teaches you how to play the game. When you wake up in your pod, it's on fire, and you need to put it out. There's a fire extinguisher on the ground in front of you. Now, because I'm a creature with a functioning frontal lobe, I grab the fire extinguisher and put out the fire, learning how to use items in the game. The only pop-up is there just to tell me what button item use is bound to. Now that the fire's out, I need to repair my pod. Instead of flashing a giant sign on my screen saying, "Build a repair tool," and leading me to the resources to do so, or even lazier, just putting them in the pod's storage area, it just leaves me in the pod to put together that, hey, a repair tool might be able to fix my shit. And I'm encouraged to figure out how to find the resources for said repair tool, and to then fix the pod myself. Now, I know I've been glazing the opening pretty hard up to this point, But I do think there's one major problem with it. And that's that we get literally no hint at the fact that this planet was previously inhabited. Now, this does stem more from the story itself, so I'll touch more on that in its section, but just know, I have some thoughts on the lack of signs of past inhabitants. Originally, that was the only real point about Subnautica's opening that I thought could really use some work. But having played through Below Zero's opening now, there is one thing I think it does to vastly improve on Subnautica's, which kinda caused me to rethink my scoring a bit. That being said, with how well this game's tutorials are handled, and how iconic that first step out of your life pod is, I could not feasibly rate Subnautica's opening any lower than an 8 out of 10. Speaking of Below Zero, by the way, I admittedly have some issues with its opening cutscene. Unlike Subnautica, because Below Zero is about a willing descent onto the planet, its opening cutscene actually has a bit of dialogue. And it's kind of cliche. It's very much got a, "You don't gotta do this, kid. Your life's worth more than this. I gotta do this, not just for me, but for her," type energy, which, if I'm being honest, I'm not really a fan of. That being said, following a bumpy ride down to 4546B, the Subnautica devs show that they still know how to make a damn good tutorial. You land on, well, land this time, and the second you get control of your character, you're faced with a brand new bar for temperature. It drops as you run around until you come across one of these glowing flowers. It raises it, generating heat, and instantly, you know that you don't have free reign of the land like before, and that the cold can be just as dangerous as oxygen loss. This is followed by a sprint to the ocean, where we see what caused me to go back and rethink my rating on Subnautica's score. The twisty bridge zone? Yeah, I'm just gonna call it the safe zone. The safe zone here is stunning. I mean, it's just so much more dynamic. With twisting coral bridges and plateaus surrounded by shallow ravines, this first area is an absolute joy to explore. And it blows the safe shallows from the last game out of the water. When you finally get to your life pod, though, we see my first actual problem with the game.
Found the drop pod.
Your main character has a voice, and she kind of speaks a lot. Now, admittedly, at the time of writing this, I have not yet played past the opening of Below Zero, so as the story progresses, I may find that I like this feature. But I remember it being one of the biggest turnoffs that pushed me away from this game initially. And here's why. Part of what I love about Subnautica is that your character, while having a model, is pretty much a blank slate. It is very easy to put yourself into the game, to get immersed in the feeling that you are the one on that planet, struggling for your own survival. Now, it's a lot harder to get that level of immersion when every 5 minutes you get a quip from the player character.
Holy smokes! That did not go as planned.
That being said, I will acknowledge that by virtue of Robin being a real character, with a real backstory and driving motive, there's a lot more room for story, and I did really enjoy the first few voice memos from her sister Sam, whose significance we'll talk about when we get to the story. They had a lot more emotion and personality to them than most of the things we got in the last game. For now, though, I can't really tell if these improvements in story potential will outweigh the loss of immersion. We'll see later when I actually know how the story goes. Oh, also, they changed the PDA's voice, and I don't like the new one.
This PDA has now rebooted in emergency mode with one directive: to keep you alive.
The standard oxygen tank can be upgraded for deluxe and VIP breathing.
Overall, though, Below Zero's opening is still miles better than the opening to a lot of games I've played. And most of my gripes with it come more from apprehension at the fact that the game looks like it's going for a grander narrative that I worry could fall flat, leaving me just a bit more hesitant than with Subnautica. 7 out of 10, though. By now, whether you've played Subnautica or not, I'm sure you can tell just from the footage I've been using that this is a very pretty game. But looks alone are not everything when it comes to atmosphere. I mean, just take any suspense thriller you've ever played and throw circus music on in the background and you'll see real quick what I'm talking about. Luckily for us, though, Subnautica didn't make the bold yet questionable choice of pitching a circus tent in the ocean. In fact, the entire soundtrack to this game is just banger after banger after banger. And the devs knew exactly what tracks to put where to set the tone. For example, you get a nice vibe song in the Safe Shallows, pretty upbeat banger in the fiery interior of the Aurora, and this track that for some reason makes me feel like there's a man in my house with a knife right now. Now, I say that with one caveat, and that is that this game is much better experienced with headphones. I talked about this a few times on stream when I was playing through the game. Oh, by the way, if you've been enjoying this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and maybe even stop by on stream sometime over at Felix_Fighter on Twitch. Anyways, as I was saying, I talked about on stream how the game's atmosphere, particularly in the deeper, more scary areas, had a lot less of an effect on me back when I was a kid playing on my Xbox in the living room. Those speakers didn't have the directional sound that my current headphones have, and the pants-shittingly terrifying roars of Leviathans weren't directly in my ears. This disconnect between my memory of how tense and even scary this game can be, and how little it messed with me as a kid, though, did lead to some unwarranted confidence. Paying for views would just feel unsatisfying, because Oh, fuck! No. Down. He didn't see me, right? He didn't see me, you're not. Surely you're not. He saw me! Go away! I forgot that thing was in this fucking biome. Away! Please! Let me out! Oh, I forgot there was a Reaper Leviathan in this fucking biome. Subnautica usually doesn't fucking scare me. Cause I don't really have problems with, like, the ocean or anything like that. I swam in the ocean quite a few times. I'm gonna be real. I forgot that guy was there, and when I heard it and I turned and it was right next to me, I was like, oh fuck. Hi! Okay. What the fuck? The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to this game's atmosphere is something I touched on a little in the intro. And that's how it builds this idea of isolation. Throughout the game, you find pieces of the wreckage from the Aurora, the destroyed life pods of your fellow passengers, remnants of bases made by survivors of a different crash, and abandoned facilities from an ancient civilization. All of these are either run down, destroyed, or dormant, to different degrees, with messages detailing their collapse. You could see just in the environment that others were here before you, and that none of them were able to survive this place. It just continually reinforces the idea that this planet is going to kill you. There is no help coming. You are alone. That being said, this atmosphere falls right apart when you watch a Leviathan swim straight into the Earth itself, which is more common than you'd think. 9 out of 10. I mentioned this when talking about its intro, but I actually think Below Zero is an even more beautiful game than Subnautica. Just to give a couple of examples, its safe zone is more vibrant, its dunes / underwater vents / whatever the hell you call this area is more diverse and colorful, and its deep sections are a lot more interesting, in my opinion. One area in particular that I love is this cotton spore type deepish biome. There's something about the red tones in the water and the floating bulbs against the fuzzy white background that just makes my brain feel good. Putting that aside though, like I said with Subnautica, visuals are not everything when it comes to creating an atmosphere. When it comes to Below Zero's music, I'd say it's on par, if not just a small decline from Subnautica's. It has a similar vibing quality to it where it builds up the various regions without ever really feeling like there's a live band floating through the sea behind me. But it doesn't really have any standout tracks to it, like Subnautica's Abandoned Ship, which is an absolute classic. That being said, I think Below Zero's most glaring weakness when it comes to atmosphere, though, is its creatures. Being the only actual threats in the game, it's kind of important that these various creatures are able to instill fear in the player, or at least create a level of tension when exploring around them. And I think Below Zero kind of falls flat on that aspect. I think the easiest way to show this is to compare the differences between the two games' main threats, the Leviathans. Both games have 3 different main Leviathans. In shallow waters, Subnautica has Reapers and Below Zero has Chelicerates. In deep waters, Subnautica has Ghosts and Below Zero has Shadows. And in the lava pits, Subnautica has sea dragons, and on the glaciers below zero has ice worms. For the sake of time, though, we'll just be looking at the shallow and deep water leviathans here. Let's start with the shallow waters, since those are the first leviathans most people run into. Reaper leviathans are the face of Subnautica. I'd argue most people that have played the game think of a Reaper first when asked to think of a leviathan, and that's because of two main things. They look terrifying, and they are loud. If you hear a Reaper, you know you've screwed up. Now, let's compare this to Below Zero's Chelicerate, at about 2/3 the size and with a much less intimidating appearance. These things are barely bigger than the weird shark things in the biome that borders theirs. In fact, I didn't even realize this was a leviathan until it properly grabbed my sea trunk. Combine that with a fairly lackluster roar, and you've got a creature that only ever registers as a nuisance and not a real tangible threat, despite having the same health as and comparable damage to the Reaper. Like, these two are equally dangerous, but the Reaper makes me shit my pants, while the Chelicerate just kinda shits the bed. Following that, we have the two deep-water leviathans. Now, I actually like the Shadow Leviathan's design quite a bit more than the Ghosts visually. Being this weird underwater centipede type thing with a large bioluminescent mouth, it works for me. But once again, the sound just falls flat. The Ghost Leviathan has shrill, echoey cries that, while much quieter, blend in with the tense, ominous music of the Lost River to make your skin crawl. On the other hand, the Shadow Leviathan's roars try to mix a bassy, deep roar with like a shrill chittering to a pretty underwhelming effect. Like, I wanted to be scared of this guy, but when his own voice can't decide how it wants to scare me, I struggle to really care. Overall, I felt more like my experience with this game mirrored my memory of playing Subnautica as a kid. Like, there are a lot of sections that I know are designed to be tense that I kinda just shrugged off while playing this, and it never really got me, like Subnautica did in the clip I showed earlier. Despite that though, the overall aesthetics of the game are still gorgeous, the music is still really strong, and most of the creatures are at least visually appealing. So it's a 7 out of 10. Now, for this section, I want to talk about the actual story of Subnautica. But before I get into that, I do feel it's important to talk about how Subnautica conveys its story. Subnautica doesn't have any NPCs roaming around the world to talk to the player or participate in things like cutscenes or the story. Instead, its story is entirely conveyed through old audio recordings, PDA entries, data entries, and the landscape itself. I'll talk a bit more about how each of these play into the story when necessary, but in general, it allows for the creation of that isolation I've talked about that's so important to this game. And it creates a constant, ominous presence that every entry is the words of a dead man. Moving on from that though, Subnautica has three main stories working in tandem. The story of the Aurora and its survivors, the story of the Degassi survivors that crashed on the planet long before you did, and the story of the aliens that once inhabited this world. Now, this is not going to be a comprehensive breakdown of the game by any means. I genuinely think if you haven't played the game, you should go out and play it for yourself, and this isn't meant to be a substitute for that. But I am going to be spoiling some stuff from here on, so yeah, you've been warned. Alright, let's start with the Aurora and her survivors. As you saw, the game opens with your ship crashing, but as you've probably guessed by now, you were not the only one that managed to get to an escape pod. As you play the game and explore around the map, you'll occasionally stumble upon the destroyed remains of the life pods of people who had no plot armor, most of which will have a PDA with the survivors' last moments and some sort of blueprint. Most of these have no real game impact, but some of them are, definitely something.
Show me the path. In life, truth, and love for mine is the power. I am the one. On and off and on again. Life is a game which the universe plays with itself. I am done playing as this bundle of flesh.
Bro is going on a fucking... What the fuck? Bro went kind of crazy at the end there.
On top of this, you'll occasionally get distress signals sent directly to your pod's radio, with coordinates. These tend to lead to mostly important things in places, like Life Pod 3 having a sea glide fragment, or Life Pod 12 being close to the opening into an important cave system. Eventually, though, through your radio, you'll hear from your crew's second mate, who's taken over following your captain's unfortunate demise, and learn that he's trying to gather survivors to try and work together to, well, survive. This is important because he gives you a signal location for one of the only 2 pieces of dry land in the entire game, the Degassi Island. Sadly, he's dead when you get there, having died off screen to save the game's ratings. But it does lead you into the next big story place, the original Degassi base. The Degassis are the 3 survivors of a crash that happened years before the Auroras. There's Bart and Paul Torgal, and Marguerite Maida. Having crashed near one of the 2 major islands, they started out by building a couple of small habitats and grow beds to try to become self-sustaining, while they try to find a way off the planet. These bases actually end up being the main place the player can pick up the majority of their habitat blueprints, which are a necessity if you want to build any kind of base in this game. Quickly, you see that Paul Torgal was the highest ranking officer of the survivors, and that he sees himself as the de facto leader. He's cautious, wanting to avoid the dangers of the ocean, and believing that their company will actually send a rescue team, despite the mountain of evidence against that. Marguerite's a bit of a hot-headed, brash woman that's tired of listening to Paul's orders, and that believes that they're just sitting and waiting to die of starvation on the island, not having enough seeds or growing capabilities to sustain themselves. And Bart is that middle ground, and usually the voice of reason. He sees that they can't survive on the island, but that the ocean is too dangerous to just dive straight into. Eventually, though, there is a PDA where they agree to venture into the ocean for better food and survival odds. This leads to a string of bases where you can get all kinds of practical base blueprints, like the one for a water purifier or even a nuclear reactor. But with every new base comes more problems. The hull's not holding firm in the first one, and then the creatures are too dangerous at the second. To make matters just a little bit worse, with every new PDA we see the increasing tensions between our survivors. Paul's still too cautious, Marguerite's becoming more fed up and more reckless, and Bart's getting tired of trying to keep the peace. Eventually, when you find their final base, you learn from Bart's voice memo that the group of them are sick, that there's some sort of bacteria or virus in the water that's killing them, and that their time is limited if they can't find a cure. A fight breaks out, and Bart storms out of the base. The message ends when just seconds later, the sound of a Reaper Leviathan's roar cuts through the audio. Now, looking around, I think it's pretty obvious just how that thing's tack went. Speaking of that disease, by the way, that leads us into the final piece of this game's story. I mentioned earlier that the Degassi Island is one of 2 islands in this game. Well, the other one happens to be home to this giant alien structure that I'm sure has absolutely no nefarious purposes. As you explore this place, you'll eventually find this little device, which, well, let's just say it gives you a little prick. Turns out that bacteria in the water, which is called Kara, by the way, well, it's in you. And this planet, well, it's a quarantine zone. That's right, you've stumbled into the deserted remains of a planet post-extinction event. Now it's up to you to go from alien facility to alien facility, following the trail of their research into a cure to hopefully find a way to make what an entire civilization couldn't before you die. These facilities range from useless little rooms and random biomes that just tell you lore about stuff in the world like plant life, to massive, half-destroyed containment facilities that were used to house and study a breed of Leviathan immune to the disease. Oh, also, sometimes when you get close to a facility, a weird hallucinogenic vision of some creature talks to you, but that could just be the disease talking. Or it could be a 600-foot-long sentient Leviathan with telepathy. So yeah, turns out the cure to this disease is actually just an enzyme naturally produced by this thing. But she didn't want to give it to the previous aliens because they were being mean. And, well, maybe because they also experimented on and killed one of her babies, but I mean, who's really counting? Anyways, she'll give you the cure if you help her eggs hatch, which you do. And, well, she gives you the enzyme and releases her children out into the open ocean to hopefully not die. Note, there is a fully grown Reaper Leviathan about 100 to 200 meters away from the portal they leave through, though, so yeah. With the disease cured, you can deactivate the quarantine, and with that, you're free to build yourself a rocket and get off the planet. Overall, I'd say the story itself is pretty solid. The world is built out so well. There is so much background data in just the PDA scans that you could spend hours just reading lore. and the story meshes with the gameplay pretty solidly. That being said, I do have quite the list of complaints that I'm about to get to right now. So one thing that's always annoyed me about this game is that despite being the most important aspect of the story on a personal level to your character, nothing with the Aurora survivors is necessary to the plot. The only things you really get from following them are directions to the Degassi Island and knowledge that there are plans for a spaceship on the Aurora. But like, these aren't actually necessary. Like, I remember as a kid finding the Degassi Island well before getting the second mate's message. And every playthrough I've ever done, I visited the Aurora well before the game tries to prompt me there. Like, these messages and the life pods are cool, but they are so inconsequential that I usually only interact with them if I accidentally run into one while searching for something else. Just doesn't hold enough gameplay influence to entice you to go and make a dedicated trip out to these remote crash sites, because they all have the same stuff. A single blueprint and a PDA. On the other hand, the Degassi stuff is actually pretty crucial to go out and find. Following this story gives the player some of the best blueprints in the game, and the alien tablet required to finish the alien story, so their bases are always worth a trip. That being said, when it comes to their story itself, I can't help but feel like, oh my god, Marguerite needed to shut her damn mouth. Almost every idea that gets them in deeper shit is her idea. And this could work if she wasn't so abrasive. She's definitely written to be a character that you're supposed to think is cool and badass. But she's written like baby's first edgelord, making her too cold and uncaring to connect to. But I mean, at least her cocky arrogance gets her killed in the end, so that's something. My last gripe with the story is something I mentioned all the way back at the start of the video. And that's that this planet, that was previously home to an entire species of advanced life forms, has no signs of past life. There are no ruins of cities, there are no grave sites from the disease, there's no waste or garbage left over. There is more proof that humans were on this planet after 2 ships have crashed than there is that there was an entire civilization here before that. And I know some of you will be like, well, if you read the notes, you'd know they were a hive mind, and they were actually an advanced enough society to upload their minds to computers, and they didn't need all that since they were all digital. Well, first off, no one starts digital. There would still be remnants of cities from before they gained that technology. Secondly, that argument doesn't even work, because Below Zero shows that they did keep actual cybernetic bodies. Hell, you even scan a few of their corpses. Why is the only sign that they were here, like, 4 main facilities and a couple of smaller sites? It has always bugged me, and it will continue to bug me, and I needed to get that off my chest. Oh, and one last little story thing that some of you who've played the game before probably noticed I left out was the sunbeam. So, in this game, to guide the player to the first alien facility, and to show them that getting off the planet won't be as simple as just building a rocket, they added the sunbeam, a space shuttle that picks up your distress signal and decides they're gonna come pick you up. They tell you to meet them at the facility's island, and even breach the atmosphere to land, but as they do, well, this happens.
Change course. Set thrusters to full.
The thing is, all of this is time-locked behind a string of messages on your radio. So, curious, I decided for my playthrough on stream that I'd just not trigger the Sunbeam's messages to see what happens if you get them to come after curing the disease and turning off the cannon. I did this because there is a line in the first message where they actually confirm they're coming to try to rescue you, where the captain of their ship forgets to turn off his mic and admits that he's pretty sure he isn't a good enough flyer to land a vessel his size on an island that small. I was hoping that that was their failsafe for the late call. You see that he can't really land it, he was right, and he crashes into the dead zone where his ship's wreckage would have landed anyways. But no, he just says, "Damn, Chief, too much debris in the atmosphere, I'ma leave." And like, I know that was probably always going to be the answer to the what if, but like, that failsafe line earlier got my hopes up, and my dreams were crushed. Overall though, the story is still mostly good, though my gripes are pretty strong with it. 6 out of 10. Now it's time we look at Below Zero's story. Unlike Subnautica, which was built around the idea of landing on an unknown, unexplored planet with no connection to the outside world, Below Zero sees you landing on that same planet, seemingly years after Alterra started to do research on it. With a willing descent and actual man-made structures, there's much more for the story to build itself off of. Don't get me wrong, the planet's still mostly uninhabited, and most of the story is still told through audio logs and PDAs, but with that stronger connection to the outside world, it allowed for the story to be a bit more connected. Feels a lot less like there's a bunch of different threads running in parallel to each other, and a lot more like a single cohesive narrative. So I think for this section, instead of separating it into pieces like I did with Subnautica, I'll just tell you the story in the order I experienced it on stream. In Below Zero, you play as Robin Ayu, who's decided to investigate her sister Sam's death following a message from Alterra, the company behind the Aurora from the first game, claiming that she died in a freak incident caused by her own negligence. You're dropped on the planet's surface with pretty much nothing but an air pocket and a fabricator, meaning before you can really do any investigating, you need to get yourself some tools. As you explore around, you can listen to your sister's last messages before her death, where you see her slowly go from excited to be working for Alterra on this remote planet, to realizing that maybe this company is not exactly altruistic. It's while you're here that you get your first look into Robin as a character, and if I'm being honest, I didn't exactly like the first impressions. She feels a little generic at first, being this big business bad activist stereotype, but in like the most in-your-face way possible. Like, the first game definitely had undertones of that message, with your PDA telling you that it's tracking the materials you use and adding their value to a debt to Alterra, since as an employee, all gathered materials are theirs. And the Alterra HQ guy that gets your distress call being more worried about finishing a sandwich order than actually sending you a rescue team. But these were all small moments that didn't exactly bash themselves over your head. Robin, on the other hand, at least early on, is pretty in your face about it, and it kinda comes across as preachy. And it really doesn't help that she does not play off herself well. Luckily for you though, she doesn't have to play off herself for very long. As in your Twisty Bridge safe zone, you'll quickly pick up on a distress signal which leads you to an underwater alien facility. Once inside, you're spoken to directly by one of the aliens that once inhabited this world, saying that the storage device their conscious is stored on is dying, and that they need a new storage container. And well, lucky for them, you happen to have one on you. Robin offers up her PDA and, let's just say the alien had a different plan.
What's happening?
Transfer.
Yeah, so, by storage device, they really met your brain. So now you got a little brain buddy to talk to you as you roam around the world. His name's Alan, by the way, which, for some reason, just kinda makes sense to me. I don't know, he feels like an Alan. Anyways, Robin, understandably, isn't exactly happy with this arrangement. But Alan lets her know it isn't permanent. He just needs her help making a new body before he can leave. Problem is, he can't exactly remember how to make a body, giving us our secondary objective, finding the corpses of Alan's kind to slowly figure out how to Frankenstein him a body. I actually really like this inclusion, because this little piece of the story is what helped win Robin over for me as a character. Like I said, she did not play well off herself, but Alan adds the perfect complement to her personality. Alan is used to being part of this hive mind where everyone's thoughts and memories are connected, and things like death are impermanent as they simply keep all their memories stored for future generations. Now he's severed from that connection, and he finds himself in a human mind, experiencing life as a human does. He talks to Robin about things like mortality and the frailty of humanity, calling our bodies and minds inefficient. Not in like an insulting way, but just as an observation. Robin often fires back with sarcasm and defensive language, but also has a more grounded and caring side that we see in the moments when Alan talks about the loss of his people, helping him to understand his grief in a human way, relating it at times to the loss of her sister. It was in those small moments that I really appreciated these characters, and those are what shifted my opinion of Robin away from annoyance and more towards genuine admiration. Getting back to the story though, with Alan now in her head, Robin gets back to her initial mission of investigating her sister's death, following a lead to one of Alterra's bases of operation on the planet, Delta Station. It's here that you find most of your base building blueprints, and get introduced to most of Sam's co-workers. Admittedly, most of them don't really matter, but that being said, Fred is my GOAT, and there will be no disrespect put on his name in my presence. Speaking of Fred, it was actually him that Sam first learned about the potential shady dealings of Alterra from. She learned that he found something deep in the ice, and that Alterra quickly closed off the area after he reported it, piquing Sam's interest. Delta Station is also where you run into Marguerite. Yeah, turns out she isn't dead, and I have some thoughts on that. But since she isn't actually important to the plot, I'll save them for after I finish the story summary. Anyways, people that should be dead aside, you follow the same trail your sister did, going from research station to mining station to super secret research station, and eventually learned that Alterra found the frozen corpse of Leviathan with a still living, mutated strand of Kara in it. Now, in case you forgot what Kara is, it's the super mega death disease that nearly killed the planet. Instead of, I don't know, eradicating it, Alterra has decided to study it. Now, they claim they're doing it to advance the medical sciences. But since a cure is already known, something tells me this research is a little more nefarious. Apparently, Sam learned about this and, set a bomb strapped to a sea truck off at the lab, killing herself and one of her coworkers? I don't know, I'm still not really clear as to what her plan was or why she bombed a cave. Anyways, before she did, she stashed a Kara cure she synthesized inside a cave, so that if somebody found her messages, they could finish her work. Now, the problem with that is, I'm a little dumb, and it took me forever to find it, so let's get back to Alan. Slowly, Alan guides you through the map to small alien sites as pieces of his memory come back, which actually works to show you that there were people here before. It's not a crazy amount of stuff, mostly being things like an archaeology site or a power cell, but still, it kind of addresses my major complaint with the alien story of the first game. As you find these smaller sites though, they slowly lead you to the pieces required to build Alan a body. You find his bones in a frankly beautiful burial site, his flesh on a body crushed under an ice shelf, and his organs in a box deep underground. With all these blueprints, you can go to an alien build-a-body workshop and, well, build an Alan. Speaking of Alan's body, I have to say, I love this design. Centaurs are one of my favorite fantasy creatures, so I'm always down to clown when it comes to 6 limbs. And they kinda went all out with making this man big, and he is zooming. Alan tells you to meet him at one last alien facility, a teleporter to a phase gate made by his people that would allow him to return to a planet inhabited by his kind. When you get there, he offers to let you join him, to go to his home world and leave Alterra behind. Now, you're actually allowed to just end the game right here. But, obviously, we still have one last piece of unfinished business. That frozen Leviathan. Yeah, so it turns out the cure is actually just 100 meters away from the Leviathan on the same island, and I'm just blind, so I didn't notice the cave it was in. And with that, the Leviathan is cured, and you're also free to join Alan, helping to repair the phase gate in an admittedly really cool little section before blasting off, ending as you see the cityscape of Alan's homeworld outside the cockpit before you. Overall, I really like Below Zero's story. Builds the intrigue around your sister's death really well, and though I don't really have a great way to show all the PDAs here, all the conversations between her and her coworkers really work to get you invested in these people. Sam seems like a genuinely good person, just caught up in some shitty circumstances. And her coworkers aren't cartoon villains by any means. Most of them are also good people, just ignorant to Alterra's goals, working for their paychecks. And the ones that do know what's going on, for the most part, are believable in their justifications and thinking that what they are doing is good. The company may be generically evil, but the people aren't, which I appreciate. I also love that the game changed my mind on Robin. Like I mentioned in the intro, I was really worried that having the player character be a real character might detract from my enjoyment of this game, but I grew to really like Robin and got really invested in her story. All that being said, I do have 2 complaints with the game's story. Let's first address the elephant in the room. Miss Marguerite Maida. She's not better in this game. In fact, I'd say she's worse. She's just as bitchy, and more than half of her PDAs are just her recounting her ultra badass fight with the Reaper Leviathan that killed Paul Torgal. how she killed it with just her knife and rode the beast's corpse to the surface, surviving off its meat and burning its fat to avoid hypothermia. Isn't she just so cool? First off, no, she isn't. And she should still be dead. Where the hell did she get a cure for the disease? Like, she was here for years before the first game's events, and somehow just didn't die to Kara? Secondly, I don't understand how her writing got even worse when Robin is a similar character in the same game with 1,000 times better writing. Just like Marguerite, Robin is standoffish and assertive and confident in her own decisions and not willing to put up with people's shit. Hell, Marguerite damn near kills her twice, and in both instances, she stands her ground. The difference is, we also see her softer side. We see her comforting Alan when he's expressing grief. We see her contemplating the beauty and the imperfections in human anatomy. We see her being more than a one fucking note character. The closest we ever get to that with Marguerite is her giving Sam a small pep talk when Sam feels like Altera is too big to fight. Oh yeah, by the way, Marguerite's main story contribution is being the one that convinced your sister to go ballistic. So you know, there's that. The other issue I have with the story is that its ending is a bit sudden and disjointed. Like, Robin dropped to this planet with the intent of figuring out what happened to her sister, but she never really talked about an exit strategy. And this led to a constant question I had while playing the game. What's the end goal? Like, are we staying on the planet? Are we having the unnamed guy that dropped us off pick us back up? What's the end here? And Alan doesn't really make an offer to come with him until the portal's active at the very end, so the ending's just kind of like a mental flashbang. Like, I think it's cool. I love the landscape of the final image, and every moment with Alan feels great because his design is sick. But the ending itself just feels like it belongs to a different game. Still, neither of these issues were really game-ruining to me though, as Marguerite's mostly avoidable, and the ending, despite feeling sudden, is still pretty awesome. Overall, 8 out of 10. You may think this is a little late in the video to start actually talking about the gameplay loop of these games, but I would argue that the actual gameplay of Subnautica isn't quite what the game's built around. I've kind of hinted at this throughout the video, but my memories of this game and the nostalgia that I held for it were built more around the vibe and the story structure rather than the gameplay itself. That being said, it would be a bit disingenuous to judge this without getting into what the actual gameplay is like, so let's get started on that. Subnautica is built around two main gameplay loops: resource collection and exploration. Now, let's start with resource collection. When you first start the game, you are very limited in what you can build. But as you move around the map to gather resources and explore, you find pieces of broken tools, vehicles, and habitats that can be scanned for blueprints. Each new blueprint gets more expensive than the last, encouraging you to go out farther and farther and deeper in order to find better materials. These materials, in turn, can be used to make said blueprints or for base building. Admittedly, I didn't really mess with base building too much, mostly just because of how expensive it was. A single platform, which isn't even large enough to fit the smallest room on, takes 2 titanium and 2 lead to make. This means that a basic base like this, at least early on, can take upwards of 2 hours to put together. Combine this with the fact that the snapping for the bases is a bit weird, and there's pretty bad auto-generations for the supports, and it kind of just pushed me to making a base with function in mind over form. But then again, that could be more a product of me being bad at base building in general in most games, and not a product of this game. So take that with a grain of salt. To be fair to the game though, the majority of the base building is purely optional. Aside from a few moon pools for your vehicles and a room for storage, there really isn't a huge need for a base. Speaking of vehicles, by the way, that's a good transition into the other part of the gameplay loop: exploration. Subnautica has 3 vehicles in it: the Seamoth, the Prawn Suit, and the Cyclops. Before you get any vehicles, your explorations are pretty limited, as you always have to be close enough to the surface to get back up for air. At this point in the game, you'll spend a lot of your time searching the debris of the Aurora to find the random components and blueprints that are useful early on, until eventually you find all the pieces to a proper vehicle. The Seamoth is likely going to be your first real vessel. Having the shallowest crush depth and no real defensive capabilities, it mostly acts as a mobile air pocket and an anti-one-shot against Leviathans. It's also probably my favorite vehicle in the game. I don't know, there's just something about being in my little submarine as I float through these crazy, danger-filled depths of the ocean that just feels great to me. The construction of the Seamoth is also when the game is blown wide open. Because of its role as a mobile air pocket, it's in this submarine that you'll do your first actual proper deep water expeditions. Like your trip to the first underwater Degassi base, and the alien facility in the Lost River. That's why it's always been kinda sad to me that there's never really a reason to use it after you get the prawn suit. With the deepest depth modules, a grappling hook for traversal, and a drill arm that doubles as both a resource gatherer and a Leviathan mulcher, it outclasses the Seamoth in literally every aspect. You can also get some really good speed on this thing if you catch the right angle with the grappling hook. And it shrugs off Leviathan attacks like child's play, making a lot of the more dangerous regions easy to explore. Hell, as a testament to its power, on stream, I fell over 300 meters down into the dead zone, which is the void at the edge of the map that constantly spawns ghost Leviathans to stop the player from actually swimming off the map. And I actually managed to climb out of it! Like, I fought off 2 ghost Leviathans while using my grappling arm to climb 20-ish meters at a time and still made it out. Strengths aside, it's with this suit that the entire map is open to you. Resource gathering becomes easier as the drill can break these giant deposits, and the deepest point in the game isn't deeper than the actual max depth of the suit. To top it all off, it even has an upgrade that lets it charge off high temperatures, making it so you don't even really ever have to come back to your base. Following this though, we have the last vehicle you'll get in the game, the Cyclops. Don't build it. It's big, clunky, and hard to traverse with, which is why I literally only crafted it at the very end of the game where its fabricator is needed to make one of the rocket components. And that's about it when it comes to the actual gameplay loop. I mean, resource gathering, base and vehicle construction, and exploration are the core of this game. But the question still remains, does it do these things well? When it comes to resource gathering, I kinda mentioned this earlier, but a lot of the recipes in this game are expensive. My small base took 2 hours to build, my prawn suit took around 3, and the modules for it another 2. Part of this stems from an aspect of the resource nodes I've never quite understood. And that's that every node is a gamble.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it!
To this day, I have never understood why half the resources in the game are locked behind literal gambling until you get specifically the drill arm. But that's more a small gripe than an actual issue, as there are only a couple of times that this really annoyed me. A much bigger problem though, is what I've started to think of as the Subnautica cycle. I'm going to show you 3 clips from 3 different streams of me talking about exploration. It would be really nice if they put a marker on the map though of this 500 meter deep. I don't want to look it up, because I know the map isn't like so big that it would be possible for me to find on my own. You know what? I'm usually fairly against looking stuff up, but at the same time, it's a fucking plant. I might just look up where the fucking Reef King coral or whatever it was called is. It is. That's it right there. That's what we just spent forever looking for. It was in her aquarium. It was in her aquarium the entire time. It was right there. It was right in her aquarium. Oh. Because of the size of the map, the relative emptiness of it, and the vagueness of most of your hints as to where stuff is, it is so easy to spend 2+ hours searching for a single thing or place. Which could be cool, if it weren't for a major issue with specifically the prawn suit. I think it was one of my chatters that said it best. The prawn suit makes you Superman, and all the threats are gone. There's no danger to exploring with the prawn suit, so you could spend 2+ hours exploring with no threats in fairly similar landscapes, leading to a boring and frustrating loop in the mid-game. Not to mention just how janky the suit is at times. The grapple arm gets really weird sometimes, as if it's trying to force your model into the wall, and the suit all but stops functioning the second you try to take it out of the water. Like, I physically couldn't get it back up out of the Sea Empress's cage, even with the grapple arm, which led to a 10-minute walk of shame through the portals to get back. You know, before I actually started working on recording the streams for this video, my initial idea for the title was Why Below Zero Didn't Live Up to Subnautica, or Where Below Zero Failed. But as I played back through Subnautica for the first time in over half a decade, I started to have my opinion shift as my memories gave way to just how frustrating and boring the last half of this game is. I definitely don't hate it by any means, but realistically, I never would have refinished the game if I wasn't making this video. And it's because of that that I struggle to give this anything more than like a 4 out of 10. As the follow-up to Subnautica, Below Zero keeps a very similar gameplay loop of resource gathering and exploration, so for the sake of not wasting 5 minutes explaining the exact same thing I just did, we're just going to look at where Below Zero differs from Subnautica. Like last time, we'll start with the resource gathering. Sadly, like with Subnautica, you have to gamble with every resource node. Only, in Below Zero, your odds are even worse, as they've added titanium as a potential drop for almost every node. Now, that may make it sound like the resource gathering in this game is even worse than in the last, but there are actually a lot of other changes made that help to offset this. In Below Zero, there are open veins of raw materials on the islands and in the underwater caves around the vents that hold an abundance of a type of resource, and they don't even require the drill arm to harvest, meaning despite the node changes, the player has a lot more access to their various resources a lot earlier in this game. This increased resource potential also gets paired with a much lower material price for most necessary equipment. Okay, so let me give you an example. A prawn suit in this game costs 1 gold, 2 copper, and 2 table coral for the computer chip, 5 titanium and 2 lithium for the plasteel ingot, 2 batteries and a silicone for the power cell, and 2 quartz, a lead, and a diamond for the enamel glass. Now let's compare that to Subnautica's prawn suit, which takes 2 lead, 2 diamonds, 2 quartz, a stalker tooth, 2 ruby, 2 gel sacks, 20 titanium, and 4 lithium to craft. Yeah, it took me 30 minutes to make a prawn suit after finding the blueprint in Below Zero, as opposed to the 3-ish hours it took in Subnautica. Now, some of you may be thinking that this is a bad thing, as it makes resource grinding trivial, but that's not true, because Below Zero kept most of the habitat building recipes the same or close in value. What it did instead was making it so resource grinding was a necessary part of building a big, beautiful base, and not a progress gate. There's no longer a 1 to 2 hour time gate to progress the story if I need to upgrade a depth module or make a new vehicle. Meaning that if I was going out exclusively to gather resources, it felt more like a project than a job, which was so much more fun. Now let's turn to our methods of exploration, i.e. our vehicles. Like Subnautica, Below Zero has 3 vehicles, but only one of them was brought over from its predecessor. The prawn suit's still here, obviously, hence why I made the comparison earlier, but now it's joined by the sea truck and the snow fox. At first, the sea truck is basically just a sea moth, acting as a moving air pocket that's just a bit more durable than your flesh. The difference between this and the actual sea moth, though, is that in Below Zero, the devs sort of tried to combine the sea moth and the cyclops into one vehicle. What I mean by that is, the sea truck's main feature is that you can make modules that hook up to it, with little segments that each have their own purpose, from housing fish to sleeping quarters to even a prawn suit dock. This sounds cool at first, till you realize that since the prawn suit is still in the game, there's almost no situation where taking this bulkier, more awkward, less maneuverable truck anywhere is better than just going there with the prawn suit from the start. I have no footage of me making modules, because I don't think I ever got in this thing after I had my prawn suit. This is an issue that persists to the Snow Fox as well. The Snow Fox looks like a really cool motorcycle for the island exploration, but they actually fixed the out-of-water controls for the prawn suit in this game. And since the prawn suit generates heat and offers genuine protection from the ice worms, there is literally no reason to make the Snow Fox. I have never made a Snow Fox because its speed just does not outweigh the benefits of a prawn suit. Speaking of the prawn suit, sad as it is that this thing still boxes out all other vehicles, I will give Below Zero this. They made this thing a lot better to use. There were so many times in Subnautica where I felt like I was actively fighting the suit while trying to control it, but in Below Zero, it never felt like that. Its movements are so much more fluid and responsive, and it moves faster in general, making exploration a lot less tedious. And the drill arm can't hit leviathans while they're attacking you, meaning if you have purely the support-based drill arm grapple arm combo like I usually rock, you actually kind of have to respect them. It was honestly such a relief that they made this thing more fun to use, because it was such a drag in Subnautica, and it actively harmed my enjoyment of that game. It still kinda makes you Superman. I mean, I never really dropped under 50% durability with it, but at least it was a fun Superman. The last big gameplay change that I noticed is one that doesn't really spring from either category, but instead the game's actual design. The map of Below Zero is much smaller, while containing more human and alien facilities, and one of the human facilities even comes with an actual map with actual locations on it. Because of this, there's almost always something to do, and fairly solid clues leading to important locations. In Subnautica, it was not uncommon for me to spend 3 to 4 hours either resource grinding for materials to explore deeper, or just wandering around aimlessly searching for a single story location. That never really happened in Below Zero. I was always getting little story pieces, and it kept the gameplay engaging as I felt like I was always actually working towards something. I think the biggest thing I could say about this is, I never even contemplated looking something up in this game, while I was constantly asking chat if I should just look shit up in Subnautica. Overall, Below Zero's gameplay loop feels like a developer's second attempt at Subnautica in all the best ways. It holds on to a lot of the cool parts of the exploration from the first game, finding hidden alien facilities, or these long abandoned human bases and learning about their history, while cutting out the hours of tedious resource grinding or aimless wandering that plagued the first game. Yeah, the vehicle system is still dominated by a single vehicle, but that vehicle's more fun to use. Sure, the base building is still expensive, but the essential story stuff isn't. And yeah, getting resources can still be grindy, but they added more ways to alleviate that grind. The playtime of this game is quite a bit shorter because of all of this, but the gameplay and the story itself are so much more engaging, and I really enjoyed finishing this game. 8 out of 10. Okay, so I don't think it's going to surprise anyone who's played the game before when I say this, but Subnautica isn't exactly the most polished game out there. And pretty much all of this lack of polish comes from a lack of collision. And this is what I mean. It is insanely common to watch a leviathan, or a fish, or pretty much anything else just phase through a wall. Be it the ground itself, a piece of your base, a barrier that leads into an air pocket. This guy kept swimming, by the way. No creature in this game seems to have proper collision. This also messed with their targeting, like when I was in the final alien facility and I could both hear and see the attacks of the sea dragon outside through the wall, since I could also both be seen and aggroed onto from outside. Or when I was leaving the Aurora and got trapped on the platform because the Reaper Leviathan that had never lost aggro on me had just been camping outside. The game just reeks of a lack of polish that I don't really remember being there. Also, I never tried to replicate this on stream, but I know if you hit angles right on the prawn suit, you can quite literally launch yourself, as some of my friends have done it for me before. I did, on the other hand, regularly lose most control of my prawn suit the second it got out of the water, an issue I talked about at length a little bit ago. Obviously, none of this is game-breaking. Like, I can't pull together a Bethesda-style compilation of crazy glitches and bugs, but I'd almost prefer that. I love Fallout 4 and Elder Scrolls V for their jank, because their shit is almost cartoonishly broken at times. But Subnautica's in this weird middle area, where it isn't polished, but it isn't broken enough to be funny, making everything stand out in the worst ways possible. Still, I mean, I never got soft-locked or had to use the unstuck button, so 6 out of 10. On the other hand, Below Zero feels like it got that polish. I mean, like I said with the gameplay, you can tell this is these devs' second go at this type of game. I never really got jump-scared by a Leviathan materializing out of the floor, nor did I ever have one guarding an exit because it could see through walls. The literal only problem I ran into was that there was one time I parked my sea truck up a little too high, and since the entrance interaction box is pretty small on the roof, it took me forever to find an angle where the game would actually let me back in. Overall though, this game just felt more polished, meaning I don't really have much to say on it. 9 out of 10. Before I tell you the totals, I just want to say that this whole project has really opened my eyes to just how much nostalgia can cloud your judgment of a game. Like I said at the very beginning, I had written off Below Zero shortly after playing the opening back when I was in high school, because it felt like a cheap imitation of the game I'd played in middle school. I had remembered Subnautica as being one of my favorite games from back in my Xbox days, and because of this, I'd kind of propped it up on a golden pedestal in my mind. Coming back to it now, though, I still see all the things that cemented it in my brain as one of the greats, but I also see all the cracks in the foundation. On the other hand, coming back to Below Zero with an open mind after seeing how Subnautica had aged so poorly to me, I found that I really liked the game. Robin, who I'd written off as a self-aggrandizing anti-business mouthpiece, had shown herself to be a well-actualized and compelling character, and the game itself had shown that the developers took what they learned from Subnautica and applied it to this project in full force. Which is why, at the end of the day, it isn't even close. With a 6-point lead and a total score of 39 out of 50, Below Zero was a much better experience than Subnautica. Genuinely, if you're one of the 2/3 of the people who played through Subnautica and for some reason or another didn't pick up Below Zero, I cannot recommend this game enough. It was such a fun game to play through, and I think it deserves the same hype its predecessor got. So, to answer the question posed in the intro, no, Below Zero wasn't a letdown, but instead a masterpiece that I had been too blind to see. But yeah, that's all. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. This has been the longest video I've ever made, and it's been a lot of fun to work on. Hoping now to get fully back into the swing of things, and I have a lot more projects planned in the future. So if you're interested, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.